Hello everyone, and welcome to lesson 8.5, which is on solving quadratics using square roots. Now, in 8.4, we talked about how to solve equations by factoring and using the zero product property. Sometimes you will not be able to solve problems doing that because the equations that you're given cannot factor. So in order to solve these equations, we have to go back to things that we did back in chapters 4 and 5 and how we solved equations using PEMDAS. If we remember that section, PEMDAS starts from the bottom up. So when we're solving equations, step 1 is addition and subtraction, step 2 is multiplication and division, step 3 is exponents, and step 4 is parentheses. Now, in this case, we're going to definitely go all the way up to exponents and deal with those. Sometimes we might use parentheses as well. A big thing that we've talked about when solving is using opposite operations. And anytime we're using opposite operations, what we have to do is we have to simplify, using things like addition and subtraction are opposites, right? Multiplication and division are opposites. But now that we're getting to exponents, when you see things that are being squared, the opposite of that is to take the square root, right? So if we're unclear a little bit on square roots, right, we would say that, 2 squared is equal to 4, so that means that the square root of 4 is 2, right? So we're trying to find what number multiplied by itself gives you the number in the square root sign. But knowing that square roots and squares are opposite, that's really going to help us out. So let's take a look at these problems and we will see how they work out. Okay, so our sample problem says 3x squared minus 15 is equal to 0. Well, to start, we got to look for any addition and subtraction. Well, I see subtraction in the problem, so I do the opposite. That gets me to 3x squared is equal to 15. From there, I move on into multiplication and division. Well, here I can divide both sides by 3. And then that leaves me with x squared is equal to 5. Now, to finish off our problem, we just got to move to exponents because we have an exponent. Well, the opposite of exponents, of squaring a number is the square root. So I take the square root of both sides. What I know, and I don't know how you've seen this before, this is how I always do it. Since the square root and the square cancel out, I just kind of mark out the square root sign and I mark out the square. That leaves me with x. And since the square root of 5, there's no square root of 5, we can just leave this answer as is. If there was one, like if we had the square root of 4, the square root of 64, right, a perfect square, then we would take that number. But if not, we can leave it just like this. Okay, so that's how we solve these. It's just one extra step past what we've done, maybe 2, depending on what we need to do. All right, so let's look. We have 3 examples here of how to solve problems. And on the left-hand side, I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly just write our PEMDAS thing again as a reminder of how we are solving these. And remember, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That just gets us from bottom to top how we take care of things. So our first step in number 1 is to take care of addition and subtraction. So I use my opposite operations to do that. That gets me 1/10 x squared equals -1. All right, so now getting rid of 1/10, I could divide by 1/10, but that's kind of messy. The quicker way is just to multiply both sides by 10 over 1. And doing that, that gets the 2 fractions to cancel out, leaving me with x squared on the left-hand side. And -1 times 10 is just -10. And then to finish off the problem here, we take the square root of both sides. Square root and the squared cancel. X is then equal to the square root of negative 10. Now, technically, you can't take square roots of negative numbers, but we're more worried about the process than by what your answer is and if you can do it or not. Even though we could say we're in the imaginary number realm here, that's okay. We're not going to worry with that. We're just going to follow our steps and follow our process and get our answer. All right, number 2 is 2x squared minus 4 equals 0. To solve this, again, we start with addition and subtraction, which gives us 2x squared equals 4. Our next step is multiplication and division, so I divide both sides by 2. That leaves me with x squared is equal to 2. And then our last step is to take the square root of both sides. The square root and the squared cancel out, giving me x. And then the square root of 2 is just the square root of 2. Can't do anything with that. Okay, so now what we have is a problem with parentheses. And how do we handle that? So we'll just really take our time here to explain that. When we start out, our first step is always going to be addition and subtraction. We've done that every time. Now, we see that we have addition and subtraction inside the parentheses and outside the parentheses. Well, clearly, we can't deal with parentheses first because we're working our way up through PEMDAS. So anything inside the parentheses is a no-go. It's locked out. Can't deal with it until we've taken care of everything else. So our first step is addition and subtraction. We add 1 to both sides. That's going to give me x plus 4 squared equals 1. So now we check for multiplication and division. We don't have any. Now we go to exponents. And I see that I do have an exponent. So to get rid of that exponent, I have to take the square root. And when I say take the square root, I mean we're going to take the square root of everything and the square root of everything. On the left-hand side, the square root and the squared cancel out. That leaves me with x plus 4. And then we have the square root of 1. Well, can we take the square root of 1? Yes, we can. It's just 1. And now the only thing left for us is what was inside our parentheses, which was x plus 4, and we solve that by taking our opposite operation and saying 1 minus 4, which is negative 3. And we're done. So, with this type of math, we are in good shape for what we're doing in this section. Now, there are some extra pieces to this. Like sometimes whenever you take a square root, you're technically dealing with a positive and negative. If you remember back in high school, you probably saw that things like this, like, oh, hey, what's the square root of 4? And you would get like plus or minus 2. For our section today, we are not dealing with this. Like even though that's a thing, we're just not going to deal with it. It's not anything that we're too concerned with. We're just worried about getting through the steps and solving the problems, and then we'll go from there. So, this is how we take care of solving equations using PEMDAS, using exponents. It's one more step, and I think you guys have it. But in the event that you don't, or you have questions for me, please reach out to me and let me know.